Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the weekly live stream for the Restitutor Orbis channel. I'm your host, Lucius Aurelian, and thank you, everyone, for showing up. We are going to be discussing the power of nostalgia, or losing the old world, at least the technique for how it may have happened. And I'm going to be honest, I'm not expecting a very large turnout for this rather esoteric topic, so I thought it would give us the chance to really talk it over and come to a little bit of a conclusion about what's actually happening, because sometimes we tend to get revolved around some of these explorations that become a little too, how shall we say, large scale. In any event, the reason I wanted to focus on something so imperative, I thought, is because I thought it's important to explain what's the method for how we lose sight of the old world. And for all of you who are here, I do really appreciate it. So my greeting to Prime Explorers, channel members, regular viewers who are joining us. We are going to talk about exactly what we think is happening. Now, first and foremost, yeah, I see you, Space Fraggle, I see you. First and foremost, does anybody recognize this particular object? Now, I know some of you are already saying it. Yeah, it's good to see everybody. Oh, Jamie, right on the money, as always, and I guess I shouldn't be surprised. Jamie says it's the Lament configuration. Absolutely. And what film series is the Lament configuration from? Aha, Sean P. Yes, it is from Hellraiser. Dallas, yes, from Hellraiser. Victor Black, the Allspark. That's a good one. Yes. No, it's not the Allspark, and no, it's not an old world Borg cube vessel. It's the Lament configuration from Hellraiser, but we can see why it has different connotations to it. And so right now we're talking about what is nostalgia. And I thought that using the Lament configuration, and I'll explain what the Lament configuration is in a second, would be a good way to give a good analogy towards what is happening with nostalgia. And why is that? Because what is nostalgia? How is nostalgia defined? Well, if you look it up, it'll tell you nostalgia is a sentimental longing or wistful affection for the past, typically for a period or place with happy personal associations. I was overcome with acute nostalgia from my days in college. Yeah, right. And, you have some other origin words. So apparently it came from Greek, for all we know, but maybe it came from somewhere else. But it's oftentimes affiliated with homesickness. And oddly enough, with the tracker for the usage of the word, although how the heck anybody was tracking how much a word is used is beyond me. Not that I'm suggesting that they just make up charts or facts and figures, but yeah, I'm kind of suggesting that. It seems as though the word increased since the 1980s. What are your thoughts on that? There you go, Shannon. Yeah, massive fan of bean soup. Yeah, that'll give me nostalgia too. Ah, yes, Jamie. I remember when. So, Adam, nostalgia is a fountain of youth of sorts. In many ways, yes, brother Adam, it is. It's in perspective and also in our minds. So, hey, PCS world, good to see you. Anyways, why do we consider the Lament configuration? And what does the Lament configuration do in Hellraiser? And how does it compare to nostalgia? Well, Hellraiser, a horror series, which is 11, 12 films right now, an example of nostalgia itself, sequels, remakes, reimaginings. I think it went through how many sequels and then it was reimagined. By the way, did you know that the Allstate guy, Dean Winters, actually starred in a Hellraiser movie? Yeah, you could have knocked my socks off too. But the Lament configuration is the box that actually kicks off the series of horrifying events in the very first Hellraiser movie. Again, a film from the 1980s, coincidentally. And there's many different images of the Lament configuration. You think it's just simply a puzzle box. And as the characters tinker around with it, indeed, it's the opening scene of the first Hellraiser film, they find that it can be transformed into many different configurations, hence the name, Lament configuration. Lament meaning sad. Yes, it is quite sad. But it does have some beautiful designs to it, and yet the Lament configuration can be seen in many different ways. And when it's open, then all of a sudden you've opened this pathway to a dark dimension, and then these horrifying beings called Cenobites terrorize the main characters. That's more or less the plot in a nutshell. Although there is something even more ominous, especially in Hellraiser 2, because it is considered a gateway to the dark side, hence me going more dark. And Brother Adam Bomb saying it, Pandora's box. Yes, this is the quintessential representation of Pandora's box. And Sky Sage with the good wordplay. Hellraiser and Stargazer. True. An explorer in many ways. And indeed, the main character in the initial film, Frank, could be considered an explorer, albeit a very dark one. So, KC933. Genie's lamp of sorts. Yes. You're opening up Pandora's box and all kinds of crazy things can happen. Now, hey, Robert, good to see you. How exactly does this compare with the concept of nostalgia? Are we looking at what's originally just a standard cube, and then as we look at it in different ways, we see it different ways, and it has different configurations? Does nostalgia work in the same way? In other words, let's say I lived through the 1980s. I look back to the 1980s and I have all these fond memories of the 1980s. I want to go back home. And yet somebody else who didn't live through the 1980s, they were born in the 1990s, the 2000s, it doesn't matter when, they still have the same feelings about the 1980s. So do they see a different lament configuration? And yet nostalgia still works in the same way on them. What are your thoughts on that idea? Ah, Robert, yes, our hidden memories. Ever so true. And Peter reminds me of those magic squares. Yeah, it does look like that, doesn't it? In many ways, doesn't it? And Space Fraggle with the dimensions. uh, I know, and I'm going out in left field a little bit here, and that's okay. And Jamie says it best. A lot of people love the 80s. We like to remember the 80s, and indeed, you could say that nobody can let go of the 80s. And originally, this was going to be a little bit more of a focused exploration, but I thought I would pull it back a little bit, make it a little bit more general, because I realized talking about the whole concept of nostalgia would be a lot more useful, at least in terms of what we do on this channel. So, Dallas, maybe they were there and are back. That could be. Rock turned disco in the 80s. Yeah, that's one way of saying it. That's for sure. And reality check make in the 80s, everybody loved the 50s. Oh, that's true. And let's also recall, why does it seem like it was a lot longer from 1985 to 1955 than it is from, say, 2015 to 1985? Why does that seem like a much longer span of time? So, Heidi, well, aren't we all in left field? I guess some people might say that. I prefer not to think that way, but yeah, maybe we all are. And that's all right. It doesn't matter. We defy categorization, and that's the whole point. So, considering the lament configuration, it is different ways to see what happened in the past. And depending on your experiences, depending on if you experienced the past firsthand or after the fact. For example, I can't tell you how many people I know who weren't alive when the first Top Gun movie aired, but then they saw the sequel and suddenly, they were the biggest Top Gun fans. It was amazing watching it happen. Theaters were full. Of course, maybe it had something to do with the fact that it was just technically a well-made film, but, we won't dwell on that fact for right now. But looking at different variations of the lent configuration, we have to consider our own perception that we have of the old world and our own explorations. Is it possible that we can see the old world differently and yet both be correct in how we see it? For example, maybe I see the old world like this, just an example of this shape, and maybe Brother Adam sees it like this. Are either one of us incorrect? Are both of us visualizing what may have been correct and what we may have seen? And does nostalgia play a role in that? What are your thoughts on that? KC933. Remember when the chargers in our cars were for cigarette lighters? Yes. And I remember when you plugged your CD player into it too. Yeah, I'll date myself there. So, hey, Julia, good to see you. Left field is on your right unless you're on offense. Yeah, that's true. Very true. And Adam Bomb says it well right there. Perception is reality. Indeed. And there's many different configurations for the lent configuration. And looking at the box and what else I can do. Now we jump over to the Vatican, and you might remember during the Vatican exploration, is the opening pathway to St. Peter's a lament configuration of sorts? Now, no, I'm not making the obvious connection here. I know that's what everybody's going to think. But could different people see the square leading up to St. Peter, the obelisk that, remember, they hauled over on a ship across the Mediterranean because that was easy to do hundreds of years in the past? Don't forget that. Do different people see this entire Vatican differently? Do they perceive it differently? Or is it all the same way that we look at the old world? And why am I using this example? There's a very definitive reason I'm using this example. Aha, Sean P says it, the Vatican World's Fair. Yes, every day. And those lovely museums too, right? Gak, when music made you feel connected with another person. Yes, a lot more of an emotional effect in it too. KC933 says it. Yes, it's a circuit board. Absolutely. Lots of tight geometry in that. Sky Sage, Labyrinth. Indeed. And remember that when you actually go in and around the Vatican and you go inside the buildings, there's a lot more than meets the eye. We're not seeing the lovely Star Fort. Well, I guess you can see it back there, at least what's left of it. The great mausoleum. But in any event, you see other images, though, of what you think of as the old world, or at least remnants of it. For example, an image such as this. We see the brick walk, the train tracks. What exact year is this from? Well, of course, we play our games with the images. Was it actually taken in 1900? Was it taken in 1910? I'm not sure. But what kind of clues, what kind of hints do I derive from this image? Aside from the fact that this is just a packed square. And it doesn't matter which city this is in. This could be any city, because any city or any small town could have a lot of trolleys. Remember, we've seen plenty of images of that. And it's very bustling. What's actually going on? Mr. Beast fan, a keyhole to the underground. Yes, absolutely. And that's something I see in the Vatican a lot. Sky Sage, chaos. Yes. A good way to look at it. That's ultimately what it represents, too. And is that something we have to be careful of when we're exploring the old world? Is it possible we could descend into chaos? Absolutely. Sean P. Yeah, they seem to have electricity. They sure do, no matter how far back you seem to look. Cynthia Burns, 1920. Is somebody reading into my mind again? Oh, well. Yes, that might be the stated year on it, but. Still horses, but streetcars without them. Yep, finally. The horses got freed up from pulling the streetcars. Somebody restored power. I mean, somebody designed them to use electrical power. Minor slip there, it happens. Anyways. So could some people have a nostalgic frame of reference for the 1920s, even if they didn't live in the 1920s, or the 1950s? And yes, in the 1980s, that's what people said. Returning to the 1950s was a kinder time, especially if you were in the United States. It's when we had the wholesome family unit. And of course, they had that film in the 1990s that lampooned that whole concept. And yet, oddly enough, said a lot of other things about society. Pleasantville, perhaps you've seen it. But moving on from Pleasantville, you see some of these other images, which again give you different hints because you're trying to reconcile what you see. All the roads are always covered with mud. And you might remember in previous week's explorations on live stream, we talked about that and why we have these buildings that look different. Why do some buildings look a little newer and why do some look a little older? Well, obviously because some were built newer. Well, were they? Were they repainted? Were they remodeled? I mean, who really knows? We try to discern the answers in the images, but we still look at these images and yet somehow we feel a sense of nostalgia, don't we? We feel a sense of loss, that there's something home that we want to get to in this. Yes, chaos again. KC933, because they didn't clean them off as well. Oh, you're getting pretty good at this, KC933, I gotta say. You'd almost think that you've been around for this exploration a bit, so. Victor Black, pleasant for who? The middle class. Always a good way to look at it. But really, was it pleasant for anybody? I mean, if you're controlled your entire life, even if you have material wealth, what's the point? Because anybody can be controlled, especially those who have material wealth, consequently. Yeah, Albie says it. Everybody likes those buildings and what they say and what they show. Anyways, now, time to really throw your sense of nostalgia for a loop. Look at this in Tokyo. Is this exactly what we'd expect to see in Tokyo? Isn't this an interesting structure here? Got a nice little dome in our portal windows. And oddly enough, this could be a courthouse somewhere in the United States, right? Or anywhere really in the land. But here we have this image of Japan that seems to defy our expectations. Oh, look, they've got their own trolleys too. Well, that shouldn't be a surprise. They're always very organized, but oddly enough, a dirty road with tracks in it. Well, of course, for the trolleys, right? But is this what we'd expect to see from Japan? And yes, some Japanese here and there. Not exactly what we'd expect to see in Tokyo, though, is it? Albie, we expect some neon in Tokyo. Yeah, and maybe they're well on their way for that, aren't they? Shannon Godzilla missed one. Oh, goodness gracious. Yes, no doubt about it. Not sure. People were so future centric back then. Yeah. Looking forward and not to the past. Isn't that interesting? Something else we've lost. Because we don't really seem to look to the future anymore, do we? We still seem to do that a bit in the 1980s. But maybe that was all just nostalgia, right? The perfect example of it. Heidi, similarity so weird. I would agree. And even though I've been doing this for a hot minute now, I always feel that way. And Robert, positive bias making the past better than what we are living today. This is very true. And maybe the reason being is that because we can control what we're experiencing from the past, we don't have any control over what's happening in the present or the future. KC, is that a bell tower on the dome? Is it? Let's take a closer look, shall we? Yes, and nice antenna up there too. Not quite our traditional pagoda, but it looks like we've got brick construction on this. So, yeah, nice bricks over in Japan too. Why not? Extensive electrical infrastructure and many other details. So again, just throw this one in here because it plays into the nostalgia. This is not the nostalgia, especially those of us who are from what is considered the traditional Western world, if you will, the Western nations. At least that's what the statistics tell me most of my viewers are from. But hey, who knows? They might be inaccurate, and that's completely okay. But for most of us, seeing something like this little pediment above the door here, this is not something we'd expect to see in Japan, or these large blocks in the same pattern and configuration that we've seen in countless structures across the United States and Europe. What is this? Have we seen this before? I don't know. Maybe we have, maybe we haven't. We certainly don't expect to see it in Japan, do we? Julia, 1970s, 1980s, saw wholesale destruction of so many elegant old world homes and buildings. No good reason given. Well, Julia, the reason was they were finishing urban renewal. We had to make space in our great cities, and so that's why we did it. So, Kathy, when I see a building like that, I don't think of Japan. No, and a lot of us don't. So, and a stabulator says, throws me for a loop. Yeah, throws me for a loop too, no matter how many times I see it. And then how does it connect to some of the images, some of the artwork that we have of what the old world could have been? These very large and great cities with tremendous domes and very large edifices and structures that defy our ability to imagine with their colossal size. And of course, we're convinced, and we'll look at this later, how modern civilization can build taller, but can it really build more elaborately? Can it really build more artistically? Of course, people will deride that by saying, well, if you're just looking at the artistic appeal of the buildings, that doesn't mean anything. We've come so far now. Yes, indeed. You can continue to try to convince us otherwise. And I save the worst lament configuration for last in this introduction portion because you might recall if you've seen the second Hellraiser movie, and if you haven't, that's okay. This is considered the Leviathan lament configuration because you might recall Leviathan, i.e., the beast, the demon that controls and dominates all, at least in the dark side. It makes an appearance in the second Hellraiser movie, and it looks quite a bit like this portion of the lament configuration. Coincidentally, Leviathan just happens to be the name of the book by philosopher Thomas Hobbes that justifies total government control, and the people consent to government control, regardless of what form of government you have, because it's better, according to Thomas Hobbes, to have any form of government control than to have quote unquote chaos or anarchy or both. And we see what good things come from it. And yet, oddly enough, he called the book Leviathan. Leviathan associated with the beast, whether it's a big giant water beast that's going to terrorize the world or something much worse. And this is the final lament configuration. Coincidence, right? Shaped like a crystal. Yes, yes. PCS World. It looks like the Allspark from the Transformers. Yeah, it might have inspired it too. Or, since it was in the 2000s, maybe they were just finding good ideas. Space Fraggle, it was huge and levitate in the sky. Yes. And it's quite an impressive effect shot for that time. So anyways, that's the overview of nostalgia. There's different ways that we can see it. It can affect how we see the old world, but yet nostalgia is also being used against us. And you're going to ask, well, wait a minute. How's it being used against us? Well, what we have to ask is, how are we affected by nostalgia? And I've got the perfect example. So give me 1 second here. And you may recognize this if you've been a long-term viewer of the channel, at least what film this is from. And here we go. And does anybody know what film this is from? Eric, it represents Mount Meru. Yeah, it could. And maybe because of the fact that it goes both ways, it's the top side and the bottom side of it. So, oh, look at this. Who got it first? And reality checkmate, Jamie. Yep, They Live. You are correct. They Live, the John Carpenter movie about aliens. It's always aliens, isn't it? That have really dominated society. And when the main character, Roddy Piper, gets some sunglasses that have been configured by a resistance group, he suddenly sees all this subliminal message. And yeah, it is funny. Roddy Piper, of all people, a professional wrestler, someone who indulges in kayfabe and did kayfabe their entire life. And isn't that an interesting concept, kayfabe? But anyway, he portrays the main character, and They Live connects with how are we influenced by nostalgia? Nostalgia is used to actually influence us in very strong ways. Now, granted, this film, made by director John Carpenter, who clearly had some inside ability or knowledge, showed very directly how we're influenced. Obey, marry and reproduce, obey, consume, obey and conform, sleep, submit, conform, buy, watch TV. And now it's saying, oh, goodness, I'll just make fun of myself. Watch YouTube, watch TikTok, watch sports, obey, sleep, conform, submit. Now, I'm going to ask you, are these messages still continuing to this day, with or without the nifty glasses? Ah, Brother Adam, propaganda. Yes, it is a form of propaganda, isn't it? Beyond any shadow of a doubt. And Ted, yes, that's one of the great quotes from the film. Chew gum and kick butt. I'm all out of bubble gum. Okay. Ask me a question. I didn't quote it right. It's okay. Ah, yes, it is classical brainwashing, isn't it? And it's actually classical brainwashing. Liz LeClaire, yes. Yes, today it continues through simple repetition, or what's reported or what's not. Ah, PMC. More so today than yesterday. Yeah, and there's many more ways to reach people than yesterday. That's very true. And Jamie, subliminal programming. And you're seeing the example of subliminal programming. And Stabulator, subliminal advertising. Oh, Sky Sage, cognitive dissonance. Yes, because you're expecting people to believe that two things that cannot be true at the same time are true at the same time. Thus, cognitive dissonance. And Heidi, predictable programming. Courtesy of all those psychological studies that went on for such a long time, right? Now, little note about this film. This came out in, oh, here's one of my favorite images from it. This is your God. Currency. It doesn't matter what nation you're in. It doesn't matter where you are. Currency, it is supposed to be your God. And when someone says you'll follow the money, you'll figure out every conspiracy behind the land. Is that true? Or is that really just another conspiracy in and of itself? I don't know. I actually believe that if you analyze the concepts behind money in the financial world, you can get many great clues. But I'm not an absolutist when it comes to being an explorer. I don't think everything is all yes or no. So I don't know. Maybe I'm the one who's suffering from subliminal messaging. What do you think? Is Aurelian the one who's compromised? Setnig, 1984. Great example. Ah, yes. Vaughn, people can't perceive past the 4K apparently. So is 8K for subliminal messaging. Yeah, you could probably argue that. I mean, a lot of things with HD are very different. You know, and I'm glad you brought that up. Space Fraggle, who is on money, rulers, yeah. I'm glad you brought that up, though, about the viewing, whether, you know, we're in HD, 4K, or whatever, because I still remember how different watching some of my favorite classical films, like The Last Starfighter, was. And that's the film I noticed it for, because I had bought the big Blu-ray release. And it was completely different than what I remembered seeing on the old VHS tape. I mean, I miss the old VHS tape. So, Brian, we probably already had this very podcast. Not a chance. Sean. Yeah, that's a good one. I don't want a nation of thinkers. I want a nation of workers. Oh, so true. Ever so true. But in any event, whether you can follow money and it'll give you answers or it won't, it's safe to say that yes, there's a lot of focus on just think about money. You don't think if you just think about money. And good old Roddy Piper himself. And yeah, a lot of wrestlers could play kayfabe very well. And perhaps some other people are quite proficient at playing kayfabe. And what is kayfabe? Well, it's the plot line, it's the narratives, it's the booking of wrestling matches. Yes, professional wrestling. And yet, oddly enough, you see kayfabe in this film. There's a series of events that have been contrived. And when he puts on the glasses, he can see behind the series of events that are contrived. And you could possibly see something like this. This is one of my favorite ones. And you notice that some people, look rather strange when you put on the glasses. Now, of course, this is not a scene from the film itself, but this is inspired by the film. And I thought it was very fitting, especially if you recognize this particular area. And is this exactly what you see? Now, of course, instead of just obey, we've got divide, hate, react, right? Vaughn, the art of trickery. Yes, theatricality and deception goes a very long way. Reality checkmate. They Live, The Matrix, and Truman Show are basically the same movie. Yes, and yet each of them have their own little nuances that are very different, especially when you consider some of the variances between The Truman Show, The Matrix. But yeah, there's a lot of similarities, especially in the narrative of these films. So very true. KC933, people are strange. In many respects, yes, we are strange. But in any event. And then, of course, at the end, when he's finally able to destroy the transmitter, yes, spoiler, then everyone's able to see the fact that they're surrounded by these beings, these creatures. Now, whether you want to think of them as aliens or beings from another part of the land or another dimension, there's many ways to see it. And that's the beauty about John Carpenter, is he doesn't actually spell it out. And I even like the detail here. Like even on the alcohol, you see it, obey by, this is your God. Great detail in the film. Now, here's the interesting thing about this film when it came out in the 1980s. The first 2 weeks this film was out, there were packed lines at the movie theater, and I saw it with my own eyes. I mean, there were people lined up out in the streets to see this because John Carpenter is relatively popular, and word of mouth about this movie got out. And remember, there really wasn't an internet in, it was 1987 or 1988. Yeah, I should have looked it up. I think it was 1988. But anyways, yeah, they changed to green for a reason. Oh, yes, so true. But anyways, the first 2 weeks, this movie was selling out everywhere. And then abruptly, it was pulled from the theaters all over. And it was really bizarre because everybody thought this was a very popular movie. And yeah, it never made any sense. And I remember Roddy Piper still talks about it. And John Carpenter was interviewed on it. Spirit. It would have been a great movie if you take out the 15-minute wrestling scene in the middle. Well, Spirit, it was actually 8 minutes, and yes, it still remains as one of the most gratuitous hand-to-hand fights in movie history, especially in the 20th century. But it was to represent the struggle of trying to wake someone up and what you have to go through if you're going to try to compel someone to see. And it even asked the question whether it's right or not to do so. But yeah, it was pretty gratuitous. But sometimes, there's different ways to see different things. Is it worth it to go through a physical fight, or is it worth the struggle? It poses those questions. How hard is it to get someone to really come up? Oh, yeah, Albie. And they even lampooned it in South Park like everything else. Ah, yes, South Park. Another one of those mirrors of nostalgia, if you will. And now you're even talking about, hey, I remember when South Park was good back in 1997 when it first came out. Sissy May. Oh, yeah, Jericho. I forgot about that one. It was late 2000s, wasn't it? You're talking about the one where they set off a bunch of nukes all across random cities in the United States, and then nobody was really sure what was happening with the political situation. Yeah, great example. And that there were actually some creative shows that came out in the early 2000s. So anyway, Michael Kloss, The Struggle is Real. Yes, I agree, Michael. It is very real. Atom Bomb. It makes perfect sense that they pulled it. Waking people up to truth is anti-agenda. Ah, yes. Well, and keep in mind this happened in the 80s. And again, it was something that was quietly done. The media didn't say a word about it. There was no protest about it. It was just one of those things that quietly happened, and then on and on we went. Let's go to talking about how terrible Superman 4 was. But anyway, speaking of, we got an exploration coming up concerning that film and Milton Keynes, where they filmed it. Yes, they killed Christopher Reeve's Superman in Milton Keynes in the United Kingdom. It's a bit of a joke, but oh, Jamie, yeah, V was axed repeatedly. You're right. They even and V, that was, for those of you who don't know, that was the original mini series about the visitors that were actually lizards covered in human skin. Not only was it axed, they got rid of the producer, Kenneth Johnson. He also did the original Incredible Hulk series, and they completely changed it around as though they wanted it to fail. In the second miniseries, The Final Battle, they changed a lot of essential plot elements. Sean P. Gene Hackman, what am I doing here? Yeah, exactly. In V, The Final Battle, they changed essential plot elements. In the TV series, they clearly set it up to fail. And remember, this was in the 1980s, when we tend to think of as everything being good. And a lot of people still like 80s movies. And Castle in the Pasture, I agree. Because they do what you might consider, okay, and I'll use a very American football term here because, yeah, I grew up in the United States. So there was much better blocking and tackling in the older movies. They had a good plot. They had good characters. They had a good soundtrack. Now, a lot of movies you see in 2000s and going beyond that, you'd maybe be lucky if you got 2 out of 3. It just depends. So anyway, look at this in terms of how are we affected. Nostalgia can be used against us. Cynthia Burns says it. Yes, feel-good films. And we all look back because we appreciated the fact that those films, those TV series were well made at that time. So anyway, I think this is the last one. Yep. Okay. So since we identified how we're affected, let's go to one of the best examples, the 1980s power and spell nostalgia. Now, we define nostalgia. What's a spell? Well, there's multiple meanings for the word spell in English. What a surprise, which is one of the reasons why I like to poke fun at pronunciations and definitions. But here are some of my favorites. Spell, a form of words used as a magical charm or incantation. Or my favorite, an ability to control or influence people as though one had magical power over them. So even though there's different meanings, they kind of mean the same thing, don't they? Anyways, let's move on to the next series of images with that and take a look at some of our power images from the 1980s, power and spell. And I've got a doozy for you. And I'm sure you're all going to recognize this. And here you go. Now, just showing this image, what kind of effect does this have on you all? Night Chief, the Battlestar. Indeed, indeed. And why do you think I start with this one? And wait a minute, you're going to say, the original trilogy started in the 1970s. Yes, it did, 77. But is Star Wars associated with the 70s or is it associated with the 80s? I think we went over this before, but and Star Wars was affiliated more with the 1980s. And Empire and Return of the Jedi came out in the early 80s. And universally, everybody considers Empire Strikes Back the best of the original trilogy, at least in terms of being a good film. Oh, Kathy says it. Star Wars 70s. Oh. Well, and and a lot of people, that's when the incipience of it came about. But when Star Wars became the huge cultural phenomenon, did it really start in the 70s or was it really the 1980s? We can go back and forth on that argument. But, a lot of kids growing up in the 80s, bam, Star Wars. It was there. It was everything for them. And we all have the great memories of seeing it in the theater. Now, there's a reason why I pivoted this exploration a little bit from just going down into another nostalgia dive in the 80s, because everybody knows it. I don't really have to talk about it that much because, all I got to do is show a Star Wars image and boom. And now, on the other hand, you could explain that a little bit because it's vastly popular. From a financial perspective, it makes sense that Disney purchased Star Wars. It's a money-making intellectual property. No, we're not going to say what Disney's done with it, but we can understand why they would purchase it and why they'd want to make new films. Yes, Albie, and certainly want to pay our respects to the late James Earl Jones. And if you had a voice like James Earl Jones, you could pretty much do anything. And I'll always remember him as Thul Sadoom in Conan the Barbarian. But yeah, very sad that he passed away. But in any event, the voice of Darth Vader. And, what was interesting about the original Star Wars films was a lot of things were implied. They didn't spell everything out, but they still gave you enough plot that really inspired your imagination. And that was really something that the films had at that time. They had the ability to do that. Yes, and maybe you've heard that, one of our favorite child hero films from the 1980s, The Goonies, directed by Richard Donner, is going to get a sequel. And just so you can see how exciting that's going to be, yes, here we have the actors next to their original images. Doesn't this just sound like it would be so good? Why is anybody doing this? Can anybody tell me? Yes, The Riddle of Steel, Space Fraggle, one of my favorites. Jamie says it. Yep. Hey, you guys. Oh, you hadn't heard of that, KC933? Yeah, we can't leave anything alone. Oh, Kathy, you've never seen The Goonies. Yeah, the original one is actually a very interesting and wonderful film. Of course, it was directed by Richard Donner, and he's another one of those directors who seemed to slip a lot of old world stuff into his films very subtly. He was also the one responsible for making the Christopher Reeve Superman film so good. Credit Richard Donner. Stabulator, the Truffle Shuffle. Yeah. So for some unknown reason, yes, we're getting, I think it's supposed to be a sequel. Why? Don't ask. Playing in nostalgia? You better believe it. This is creator and producer Glen A. Larson. Now, Glen A. Larson created a slew of TV shows and intellectual properties that were very popular in the 1970s and especially the 1980s, and most of them are remembered in the 1980s. Now, regardless of what his background was, he was one of those very unique creative minds, and for those of you who don't remember all the properties he's responsible for, they're nicely cataloged in this picture. Classic Battlestar Galactica. We'll get to that in a second. Knight Rider, the original Knight Rider. And he was part of the creative force behind Magnum PI, the other part being Donald Belisario, the guy who did Quantum Leap and all the all the JAG and CIS, NCIS series. Anyways. And like The Fall Guy, for example, another TV show from, I think it was 81 to 86 with Lee Majors. That just got remade as a movie. And then, of course, there was Buck Rogers in 25th Century. Automan, that didn't really last long, but that was basically transferring Tron to a crime fighting scene. And then, of course, The Highwayman. Hey, look, it's Sam Jones, Flash Gordon, only he's got dark hair. Yeah. It was a very intriguing series, but the guy had a great creative mind and came up with a lot of different series. And why and how did these series continuously get brought back over time? And no, they didn't even wait for the 2000s on a lot of these. Does anybody remember Team Knight Rider from the 1990s? Well, hey, Dee Dee and Nota, thanks for joining us. It's all good. Yeah, Team Knight Rider from the 1990s. About the only thing I can remember from it was I think Nia Peoples voiced one of the vehicles because it was a team of vehicles. So, yeah. Yeah, not a lot of people saw it. Kathy, I like it. Yep. And nobody really remembers Viper either, do they? Victor Black, Team Who? My thoughts exactly. Just about everybody saw the original Knight Rider. But in any event, on to Glen Larson. Of course, they took Battlestar Galactica and reimagined it. And, we have our favorite character, Baltar, from the new series. I'm just an innocent scientist, politician, religious leader, military advisor. Of course, he was really a character they had no idea what to do with. And so, you always saw him with this rather scared, frightened look on his face. And, in the original series, the Battlestar Classic, as they call it, Baltar was the evil villain played by John Colicos. Very wonderfully, I might add. And he always had all these machinations, whereas this guy was just kind of being pulled everywhere. But really, Baltar had nothing on Apollo, or should I call him by his full name, Captain Lee Adama Apollo. Yeah, I loved how they had full names. This was the reimagined Battlestar Galactica, and here he's pulling a mutiny on his executive officer, Colonel Ty, pulling a weapon on him, probably because they ran out of 2-ply toilet paper. I don't know. It seemed like on that show they were having a mutiny every 5 minutes over silly reasons. I don't even remember what that one was about because there were so many, but I will admit I did watch the reimagined Battlestar Galactica. It did have a lot of potential, but it seemed to me like they were just basically taking contemporary events and throwing it into space and then just taking the ships and the concepts from the original Battlestar Galactica. Now, classic fans, there's a lot of debate about it. I'm not here to debate about the show. I'm merely talking about the fact that they still bring back the idea, but then they ramped up the nihilism in the new show by a factor of 1,000. Because you might recall that Lee Adama here decided to lead humanity to what do you call it when you commit suicide on a society level? You decide to just give up all your technology, your civilization, your history. Every time they have that line where Adama, his father, says, history will judge Admiral Kane for her crimes. And then at the end of the series, you ask, what history? The epic reset, right? Savagely. Yep. Dirk Benedict, the original Starbuck. Yeah, we don't want to forget him. Sean P. Yeah, and there were a lot of downsides. It was a lot of nihilism. It was well made, and visually it was wonderful, and the soundtrack was great in the new Battlestar Galactica. The acting was wonderful. Whether you're talking Edward James Olmos or the president, Mary, what's her name? She was in Dances with Wolves, and now I feel bad I can't remember her name, but she played the president. But the characters they wrote, though, constantly at each other's throat in this show. And you just compare and contrast Apollo, Lee Adama Apollo here, with the original Captain Apollo from the classic series. There could not be a bigger difference between these two characters. Here you have an individual who has a positive outlook, despite the fact that both shows involve the destruction of their entire civilization, just the small remnant that they have going across the stars. These two characters, the original Captain Apollo, portrayed by Richard Hatch, could not be any more different than Captain Lee Adama Apollo, or Major Lee Adama Apollo, before he resigned and then just wore a suit all the time and said stuff. But anyway, yeah, I really lost the show in the third season, I'm going to be honest. But for me, personally, I always liked the original Battlestar Galactica best because what did they have in those shows? They tended to reflect more old world concepts. Wait a minute, why are you saying that? It's not that they intended this, at least it's not what the creators intended, but what you can see is with science fiction especially, they could get away with putting more old world concepts in it. But even as early as, say, the second season of the original Star Trek, they were trying to undermine it by making it comical. Anyway, I just always find it interesting when you compare and contrast the characters from the classic Battlestar Galactica with the reimagined Battlestar Galactica. You kind of see a way that they want humanity to be, especially in the 2000s, compared to how humanity was or how it could be. Now, is that nostalgia or is that reality? What are your thoughts on that? Never watched Battlestar Galactica. It's all good, Spirit. There's many other science fiction examples. That's just one. Avon had more soul. Indeed. Hey, Stargate. Yeah, that was a pretty good show. And that was an interesting one because that was right bridging the gap when television shows started to change. And I forgot that was originally, what was that on Showtime? I think it was on Showtime originally. Yeah. Oh, Julia S. Buck Rogers in the 25th century. Yes, that show had so much potential. And they destroyed it in the second season. I couldn't believe what they did to Colonel Deering. Oh my goodness. Ugh. Talk about character assassination. Anyways. Jennifer. Yeah, Firefly had a lot of potential too. And they really crashed that show by not supporting it. But for whatever reason, it happens. So, anyways, moving on. Now, here's another example of nostalgia. Just certain cars from TV shows. Of course, we couldn't make this TV show now, could we? Yeah, you know what's funny about Back to the Future was the original DeLorean didn't exactly have the greatest performance stats, but by golly, there was something really cool about it. Although, I know it's sacrilege for me to say this, but you could say the same thing about the Trans Am and the Knight Rider. Of course, when they reimagined Knight Rider in the 2000s with the Ford Mustang, how'd that go over? And on to Miami Vice, I'll also be honest. You can tell there was a change in the original TV series Miami Vice when they went from the Ferrari Daytona to the Testarossa. Yes, I know it was not a real Daytona. It was a Viz mod, but still it was the principle. Now, how many cool vehicles do we have in movies like this that really become characters in and of themselves? Or even go to the Star Trek example when the Enterprise used to seem like a character. Yeah, there's no comparison, is there? Hate to say it, but why is that? I don't know. Rich J. Used to be able to get one for like 10K. Yeah, that's true. That's very true. Yes, Albie, it was a fake Daytona, but that's okay. It made me think it was a real Daytona. Okay, it was a TV show. They weren't real detectives either. I know that. Okay, does anybody know which of these vehicles is Aurelian's favorite before we move on? Since we're talking about nostalgia here. Oh, Jamie, yeah, where's the Blues Brothers car? Mm-mm. Just want to see if anybody's been watching the channel for a while. I think somebody out there would know which one of these is my favorite. But that's okay. I'll go. Oh, yep. Leveland's got it. Mad Max. You are correct. The Ford Falcon V8 Interceptor would be my favorite car. That's kind of what started my interest in performance driving. Okay, enough nostalgia for Aurelian. Now we go on to another character. The Fourth Doctor from the long-running British science fiction series Doctor Who, although they call it Classic Doctor Who, from what aired from 1963 to 1989. The reason I highlight the Fourth Doctor, and he made a little cameo in the intro, portrayed by Tom Baker, was that in the United States, nobody had ever really seen Doctor Who until the early to mid 1980s. And what they showed on public television stations were the adventures in the serials of the Fourth Doctor. Now, ironically enough, in the UK at that time, BBC and producer John Nathan Turner was trying to revamp the show to make it more appealing to modern audiences. And yet, oddly enough, in the United States, where they had all these futuristic sci-fi shows, everybody embraced the Fourth Doctor because these shows had Lovecraftian horror and old world concepts riddled through them, especially throughout the Fourth Doctor's tenure with all his stories, namely at the behest of producer Philip Hinchcliffe. And, Mary Whitehouse, you might remember her. We talked about her. She was kind of the critic of anything and everything. She always spoke out against shows that she saw were violent, like Doctor Who. But strangely enough, she never said one word about Threads, the nuclear war nightmare scare flick that they released in 1984. I don't know why she didn't say anything about it. They got Philip Hinchcliffe removed from the show. And he was a wonderful creative mind, and people still credit that as the high point of classic Doctor Who. I'm not going to say anything about the current incarnation of Doctor Who. There's really nothing to say about it. Anyways. But you can really say that Philip Hinchcliffe was comparable to Nicholas Meyer, who was the brilliant creative mind that they brought in to really revive classic Star Trek. He directed Star Trek II, Star Trek VI, and he was a significant creative contributor to Star Trek IV. I had no idea he graduated from the University of Iowa. That was news to me. But he was one of those creative minds. Frankly, he should have been involved with every single Star Trek film, and they probably never would have had an issue with it because everything he was involved in was just frankly gold. And did you know that he wrote the script of Star Trek II in 13 days, and he pieced it together from 5 other scripts? And to this day, it's still considered the best Star Trek movie. Yeah, nostalgia again. Make of it what you will. Hey, Sean P. Sylvester McCoy. Yes, Sylvester McCoy, wonderful actor. Honestly, seeing him again was the best part about seeing that ill-advised Doctor Who movie from 96. Ah, yes, getting the Americans involved, not a good move. Then we have car chases in Doctor Who and the Doctor fooling around with his companions. And then what do we get when they revive the series? We've got car chases and the Doctor fooling around with his companions. Yeah, I'll stick to classic Doctor Who. Thank you very much. Jamie, it's life, Jim, and you haven't poked at it. Yeah, that's true. So, well, I'll just let Petty come up here. I'll be honest with you here. I mean, as soon as I saw the revival in 2006, I think that's when I first saw it. I mean, I think it aired in 2005. I just knew it wasn't going to be like it was. It seemed more like that awful revival movie in 96 that they did. So I never touched it, to be honest with you. So. Adam Bomb, rewriting movies can steer culture through nostalgia. Ever so true. So, legendary. Does anyone know what that flap on the uniform was for in Star Trek II? The flap didn't have a purpose. It was actually because they had repurposed the interesting uniforms they had for Star Trek the Motion Picture and made them look a little bit more militaristic for Star Trek II. Although, oddly enough, Nicholas Meyer got some criticism for that. And then again in Star Trek VI, because it's a little too militaristic, even though he shows the human condition. But anyway. And then, of course, the final idea of looking at Star Trek. Remember when it descended to 4-head aliens, kind of showing the lack of creativity. And then compare that to the classic series, when they had a very shoestring budget, and yet somehow it seemed like the creatures they innovated were a little more creative. I wonder why that was. You had many energy beings, you had Horta, comparing classic Star Trek to The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine. Not that there's anything wrong with those shows, but just showing one of the elements of creativity that you kind of see them, neglecting a little bit. Hey, more forehead aliens. Whereas, in the past, it seemed like you had more creativity despite having a limited budget. But anyways, it all goes on. Why do they constantly use nostalgia in all these series that we once liked? Oh, yes, Betty, it is a term, and it's bandied about quite a bit. Cynthia Burns. Yes, the salt vampire. And did you know that was actually the very first episode of Star Trek aired on TV? Oh, yes. The Man Trap. It was not Where No Man Has Gone Before. Anyways, Inferno. DS9 had so much potential, and it was a great series. Kind of sad they didn't move on with it after it ended, but, at least they didn't drag it on. Yeah, I really like DS9 too. Voyager had a lot of potential for that matter, but it just seemed like they were kind of stuck in a recursion loop then. I'm not sure why. And then even when they did the prequel Enterprise, people try to go back and say Enterprise was so great. Yeah, A Night in Sick Bay. Go watch that episode and try to make it through it. Look, nothing against Enterprise or Star Trek Enterprise, and I like Scott Bakula, but for Pete's sake, that was just that's when I completely tapped out. Okay, enough of that. So moving on, shaping the old world. Now we'll talk about a insidious way that nostalgia is used. But actually, before we do that, thanks everybody for being here, and go ahead and hit that like button. And before we go on break, I'm going to get up a nice little map for you to look at because, yes, we are literally talking about shaping the land. That's not a good one. Oh, yeah, I'll go to Eratosthenes map here. And here you go. Anyways, so what we're going to talk about now that we've understood what nostalgia is, what it does, and how it can affect us, and looking at actual examples of how nostalgia has been used from 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, and how it's still used to this day, we're going to look at how nostalgia can be used to shape the land and how it did. Julia's Janeway was infested by a Katharine Hepburn spirit. Oh, so true, so true. I remember when they had there were rumors that the performer who portrayed Perry in Doctor Who was going to be the captain. That was interesting. Yeah, Nicola Bryant. I think that was her name. Anyways, okay, so we're going to go on break, and then we're going to talk about shaping the old world. So we'll be back in 2 minutes, and I've got your favorite intermission music on. See you in 2 minutes. Okay, everybody, we are back. Just give everybody a second to get logged back in. And let's go back to shaping the old world. Now, uh, Sky Sage, cheers to memories. Oh, yes, and we've got some memories for you here. Ted Young. Yes, the ending to Babylon 5. That was a classic reset. Legendary, thank you for that. If you do a show on the Parthenon and or Nashville, I have some decent photos of it. Also have many photos of Vanderbilt U Tower and attached buildings if you could use them. Yes, I think I could do that. I would like to get back to Nashville, no doubt about it. Anyways, Dwayne, the map is by Eratosthenes, so 2nd, 3rd century BC. Yes, that's exactly what we're told. Now, what's funny about this particular map here by Eratosthenes is he's the one that we're informed calculated the circumference of the land, the world, the planet, many different ways to say it, at around 24,000 miles. Yet, oddly enough, this map, which was recomposed in the 1800s, because, when else would it be, did not show that. And indeed, Magellan had no idea that there was still the entire Pacific Ocean to sail across when he was doing his first circumnavigation. And I find it very odd that there's any knowledge of Eratosthenes at all, because the mainstream historical account says that everything that he wrote was destroyed when the library at Alexandria was torched. So how do we even know that Eratosthenes existed? Well, of course, because Carl Sagan said so. And he said, "That's right," with his voice of authority. So you better believe it. Says he may. The continents were probably shaped differently 1,000 years ago, more like one huge landmass. And you are exactly on the right chain of thought, Sissy May. Absolutely. And there are many different ways that we can see that they use nostalgia to shape what our understanding of the land was going to be. Now, this was supposedly one of the very first world maps. At least we're told that it is. And notice that it's a perfect circle. Very interesting. We've got Europe, we've got Asia, and we've got Libya, Africa. And very interesting way to look at it, isn't it? And this is supposed to be the oldest map. And then we have Eratosthenes' map, and oddly enough, it's not a globe. It's not on any kind of globe, even though he knew it was a globe, but maybe they pieced it together and they lost it. So who knows? But then as you go forward in time, you can see that, oh yes, so we have some land out here, so they're discovering land. They give us the impression, but the question we need to ask is, did these maps actually exist during the age of discovery, or were they actually composed at a different time when the lands really looked this way? And nostalgia plays the fact in it because, well, am I looking at an old map and I'm biased by nostalgia? That's the thing we have to ask, because suddenly you can shape the land. And then things get even more complicated when we consider that other thing I'm not supposed to talk about, the Mandela effect, because it's a psyop. I'm always amazed at how many people know what's a psyop out there and what's not. Well, if you know what's a psyop, then what are you even bothering being here for? You got to be going out there and sorting out everything, right? But in any event, it's interesting to me, though, the way they filled in these maps. And once again, two-dimensional maps that you could accurately navigate. Continuing from the theme of last week. Kathy. Different times. Yes, very different times. And Heidi, keep us afraid and you will run, not walk back to where you're comfortable. Ever so true. And that doesn't even have to involve any sort of physical reality. That can just involve your mind. And oddly enough, that's what this is all about. Nostalgia used to guide your mind, to put a spell on you, to keep your mind in the right places. Definitely. Inferno. Freddy Krueger's sweater was green and black. No red, right? Anyways. But then as time went on, then they filled in more of the detail behind the land. And suddenly they really shaped the land in the way that we're supposed to look at it. Now you might remember this one where they had Terra Australis, and yet Captain Cook confirmed there was nothing down there. But in confirming there was nothing down there, he missed Antarctica. So don't ask me to explain that one. And then, oddly enough, the more recent map. And when you look at some of these more recent maps and you look at the way they show the northern land or the frozen ocean, I think this is the most recent one. Ah, yes, this is my favorite one, where they show the northern icy ocean, but then the way they display the landmass of Greenland, like, well, where exactly does the landmass end? This doesn't look like an ocean. I mean, where's the ocean here? What's going on up here? Well, they just didn't know. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, really, really odd. Land here, ocean here. So we're saying, yeah, there's land up here, but where does it end? Very peculiar. And I don't know if you've seen this particular map before. That's why I wanted to show it to you. Because remember, this is in that area where they were looking for the Northwest Passage. And right up here in the Bering Strait, where Captain Cook went bonkers for various reasons stated. And then he went to Hawaii and he got bonked on the head. And that was that. But remember, they knew how awesome he was. So they took good care of properly honoring his body after they killed him by bonking him on the head. So anyway. But I just always found that very interesting how they show the northern icy ocean and why it's very ambiguous. And yet, even to this day, now if you go to the other side here, and you look north of Asia and Europe, you get a different depiction. Oh, I like this. Old Greenland, found again in the preceding century. What the heck is going on? Just really bizarre, as though they're trying to display two conflicting ideas at the same time. I mean, is it nostalgia in a way? Is there land up there or isn't there? I mean, what do you think? Cynthia Burns, doorway out by ocean. Ah, yes. They didn't bonk him, they chopped him. I'm trying to keep it G rated here, Jamie. Work with me, work with me. Yes, they did. Or do I even say G rated now? Do I just say for all audiences or everybody? The big E, right? Yes, old Greenland. Not really sure what to make of it. And also an area that's not really easy to explore for a variety of reasons. Yes, yes, I know, Albie. Iceland, that's where you really want to go. That's where you'll see the beauty, right? But anyway, it's interesting though when you think of how it's used to really shape your expectations of the old world. Oh, Chassis had a good one. Chassis, one day it's there, the next day it's gone, I noticed. Yes, frequently. And it seems to continue to this day. So what exactly is going on with it? And Sissy May, yeah, I don't know what exactly is going on with it. You do get conflicting displays. And even on this map, it seems like they're trying to tell you two conflicting ideas at the same time. Jamie, modern maps are disproportionate, edited, and distorted. Oh, yes, very frequently. And I can't imagine why. Kathy, like the old USA map where the Great Lakes were missing and California wasn't attached. Very true. They knew it was there, but for some reason they didn't display it on the map. We can only imagine. But if you think about this and you think about the kind of power that somebody would have using that spell, and think about it. I mean, even to this day, of course, now it's fallen under the spell of division. Is it flat? Is it globe? Is it sphere? Is it triangle? Well, you know what the two main ideologies are, and it's always two ideologies. We're totally obsessed with duality here in the 2000s. So, yeah, it's either a sphere or it's either flat. Nothing in between. It can't be anything else. And if you don't agree with me, I dislike you and I can't stand you. Well, at least that's what you're supposed to think. But, anyways, I just find that very interesting. I find it interesting that even on this map, they're trying to say two different things. For one, the positioning and existence of Greenland, and two, what exactly is up in the northern portion? Is it the Arctic Ocean or is there land up there? I don't know. So, anyways, something else to be aware of and something else to keep in mind as we go forward with our explorations. Because no, we haven't come close to sorting it out yet. Ah, look at this, Casey. It's literally a dodecahedron. Yeah, why not? Iliad, Iliad. It's all the above. So true. Hey, hey, Space Fraggle. Looks like you've come up again. Thank you and welcome. Anyways, The last section, the Lost Old World. And let's transition here. And this is where you're really going to see something interesting from this concept of nostalgia. Now, what I'm going to show you is an image of New York City that was taken in the 1980s. Now, I can verify that this image was taken in the 1980s. Now, what do you notice here? And we're looking at the New York City skyline. What do you notice is being highlighted in this image from the 1980s? Vaughn, Mapaganda. Yes, it is Mapaganda, isn't it? It's all good. Everybody's welcome at all times. So, yes, the towers are featured here. But in addition to the towers, what else do you see? I mean, yeah, that stands out to us because they're not there now, of course. But what do you really see that they're highlighting in the 1980s, though, about the overall skyline? Ah, there you go. New world over. Modern buildings. Yes. And when you look closely, you'll notice that there are still some old world buildings, but they're hidden by all of the more modern constructions that show the signs of modern construction. And nowhere is this more direct than if you go to the town or city of Rochester, Minnesota. They have one of the most beautiful old world Art Deco buildings there, and they have it completely surrounded. We'll be exploring that soon. And I think I'm going to have a guest presenter on that one. So that should be very interesting. Now, you look at this older image of New York City, circa 1930s, and what do you really see in the difference here? Which one really does look more advanced? And remember, are we being objective or are we being influenced by the concept of nostalgia? Or does it not exist? I mean, if you didn't live in New York City, well, it's kind of all the same thing. But if you did, well, maybe you're influenced by it. But is there a shocking difference between the two time frames? Ah, yes, the latter. And I would agree with that, Jamie. I would fully agree with that. Yeah, I mean, look how impressive the Empire State Building is in this one. Oh, yeah. And really, you could argue that there is no modern building that compares to the Empire State Building or even the Chrysler Building. Now, someone on the comments section tried to convince me that, Art Deco buildings, they're still built on steel frames. There's nothing special about them. No, I don't agree with that. Now, everyone's welcome to their opinion, but I disagree with it. And I'm calling it out because of the fact that some of the most incredible interior construction, which defies explanation with legitimate old world materials, happens in Art Deco buildings. And on a member exploration, I actually got inside one that had some of the most incredible. I mean, it was literally like another world. And that's what you'll get in these Art Deco buildings. You go into the Chrysler Building, you go into the Empire State Building, it's literally like you're going into another world. You go into one of the more modern buildings that have been built since, not so much. And then, of course, you look at this older image, and we've looked at this before in New York City, and just think about how it compares with this image here. And tell me which one has more of a unique appearance. Which one really stands out and stays with you more? Sissy May, only took 1 year to build the Empire State Building. Well, of course, Sissy, because they worked harder then, remember? And everybody was a master craftsman. And everybody automatically knew how to build Art Deco, right? Sky Sage, weather resistant, yes. And the Empire State Building was a little bit more than just weather resistant, wasn't it? You might remember that in the New York exploration. B-24 resistant, as it were. Hey, Lulu. The newer picture looks flat. Yeah, it does, doesn't it? It is interesting. Sean P., how long did it take to demolish the Waldorf? I'll have to look into that. I really will. That's a very interesting question. Vaughn, Tsar Bomba destroyed New York? Yeah, why not? I mean, they say the shockwave circled the planet 3 times. So, yeah, why not, right? Who knows? Chassis. The newer structures scream temporary. Absolutely. Probably one of the best ways to view it, too. That's exactly what I feel. PJCC West. One looks to be designed by people, the other by machine. Another wonderful observation. Wonderful. Sarah with an H. The newer image looks like a composite image. I'd agree. Have Bliss. Yeah, Battery Park. Good call out there. And that was something you used to see a lot featured in the older images of Manhattan and New York City as Battery Park. And the older structures and obviously a lot of different construction material. But we've been over that many times. And then you look at this particular image, speaking of Battery Park, and yeah, this is from the 1980s. And here you can actually see some of those old world buildings still standing and see how they compare and contrast with the newer structures. I don't have to point it out to you. I'm not going to insult your intelligence or your observation, but you can see it. And it's interesting that in the 80s, they wanted us to focus on these newer buildings. They wanted to give this impression that, yes, they were building brand new cities. Although, ironically enough, there were how many Italian science fiction films called Rumble in the Bronx, this and that, or Warriors in the Bronx. There must have been 20, 30 of them. I don't even remember that they filmed right across the waterway from Manhattan. It's quite intriguing. No shortage of them. Even Mystery Science Theater 3000 covers several of them. Atom bomb, sea level or sea curvature? Yeah, I'm with you, brother. I don't know either. It is just another one of those interesting ones. Ruler of the undersky. Missouri has underground roads and tunnels. Oh, does it ever? And we looked at that when we looked at Underworld challenges and all. And there's many more. Yeah, in fact, hey, Sooner West, good to see you. We're so much smarter today and can build better. That's right. And faster. Well, actually, not really, but we say we can. And cheaper. Vaughn, I knew you'd have one for me. Bronx Warriors. Yes, so true. Anyways. And then what do you think of this image? So this is Flushing Airport, circa 1930. Does this image seem like it's a little off for some reason? I mean, this was New York City Airport, according to the account. There's just some interesting oddities in this 1930 picture, isn't there? And why am I featuring this? Well, because how many people would just look at this and say, this must be a picture of Flushing Airport in 1930, right? No nostalgia here. PJCC West. Sometimes it's like looking at two cross dimensions frequently, and maybe even more than two. KC933 looks like MASH. Yeah. Now, I'm not talking about this image, but I'm talking about MASH. They used a lot of miniatures in some of the setups on MASH too. Amazing how they pulled that show off. Sissy May. Is that where they tested bombs? I don't know. Why not? Okay, I'm not going to say anymore. I'm going to get myself in trouble here. Atom bomb. Mud tarmac. Yeah. Easy to take off, especially one of those old prop planes. Tone Malone. Yes, some things just never change, do they? Oh, Inferno. Looks like a watercolor. Yeah. Maybe Bob Ross painted it, right? Okay. Enough fun for that. And then, of course, the R101, one of the British airships, rigid airship going right over St. Paul's Cathedral. I always like this image because you can see a little bit more of old world London. Because they've done the same thing in London today that they've done in New York City. They've put up all these lovely modern buildings all around the great old world buildings. And I haven't gotten to my exploration of London yet. That's on the docket coming soon. There's a lot to look at with London, though. I mean, that's going to be several explorations. And Paris, many of the other cities in Europe. There's a lot of dimensions to them. London is very intriguing, though, kind of in the same way that Washington, D.C. and Rome is. I've only covered the Vatican. I haven't actually done an exploration of Rome either. But I always thought this would be a great image to think of the airship nostalgia that we had, because remember, that's all it's supposed to be, an airship nostalgia. Now you got nice little balloons you can float around on and have the Goodyear blimp that gets you some images from the football games that, just are repeated all the time and the same images are repeated. But yeah, imagine this, having a rigid airship going right over St. Paul's Cathedral. Must have been something to see. Yes, and by all means, please hit that like button and thank you everybody for joining. All right, so I have one little bonus section that actually plays into nostalgia here, and I've waited a long time to cover this because this goes back to the early days of the channel. Now, you might recall that I've done several technology videos concerning Tartary in the old world, and one of my favorite ones that I started off with was the concept of armor, specifically plate armor. And I'm always amazed at how many people misquote me on this one because what I said in the video, and I very intentionally said it because the point was to set something off. And I'll tell you exactly what I saw off and what the method behind my madness was here in a second. But in any event, when you look up armor and we talk about plate armor from what we think of as the Middle Ages, they say they developed it from when to when, who knows for sure. Well, it was used from the late 1400s to the early 1600s, and then development of firearms made it obsolete. Anyway, what I said in the video was that there were accounts that plate armor, when you included the armor on the horse too, were anywhere from 300 to 500 pounds. Now, of course, if you do a search on Google, which, yeah, we can always do a search on Google, they'll tell us a complete suit of plate armor made from well-tempered steel would weigh around 15 to 25 kilograms or 35 to 55 pounds. Now, read this next part very carefully. The wearer remained highly agile and could jump, run, and otherwise move freely as the weight of the armor was spread evenly throughout the body. The whole point being is that we have a nostalgia for the Middle Ages. We have a nostalgia for the knights in armor. Now, oddly enough, when you look at the older accounts and books, they will tell you the armor actually weighed 300 to 400 pounds, depending. Now, obviously, somebody called that out like I did. And what did they do? They walked it back. They had to say, oh, well, no, it was actually only 33 to 55 pounds. And if you even question this, you'll be ridiculed because there's so many people that were around back from 14 to 1600 who know, right? Anyways, atom bomb. Yeah, Renaissance festivals. That's right. And the armor that you see there is very authentic. Don't worry, I got an even better example than Renaissance festivals, but let me get to it. Anyway, so that's what they'll tell you. Okay, so yeah, we know. And the armor that we have, is it legitimate armor or was it just in the museum or was it just ceremonial? Don't know. Was there a difference? Well, they say there was. But if you look at this example, 1460 to 1480 Italian plate armor. And then there's different accounts with the average weight. So the lightest configuration, it was about 29 kilograms. But the heaviest configuration, 51 kilograms, or well over 100 pounds. More than 2 times what our little answer here on Google tells us. So, and that's quite a significant difference, wouldn't you say? 25 kilograms, 51 kilograms. Now, yeah, that's heaviest configuration. But oddly enough, this seems to be a little bit closer to what the original written accounts said of what the plate armor wore. Now, I know you're asking, Aurelian, why are you making such a big deal about this? Because it's interesting to me. It's an example of how the mainstream academics and scholars will walk something back when people question it. Because it did not make a lick of sense from a logistics perspective for armor to weigh so much. Excuse me. Anyways, so they had to walk it back. They had to say that it was lighter. But then they create another problem by saying it's lighter. If they say it's lighter, then they're saying they had more advanced methods of constructing armor. They could construct armor on an assembly line. They could standardize it. How exactly were they able to do that? Well, don't ask. Anyways, yeah, can you imagine jumping around in this? Even if this was only 30 pounds? Especially when you look at how much modern interceptor body armor wears or small arms plate inserts that the modern military wears. Let you in on something. They weigh a little bit more than 35 to 55 pounds, especially when you have all your gear on. This is modern infantry, for crying out loud. Anyways, and then imagine the horse being armored like this. Now, I'm very familiar with horses. And what would happen when you put all this weight on a horse? Well, when you're cavalry and you're reliant on your horse is going to get tired out a lot faster. You're going to have to water your horse more. Your logistics continues to increase. But yeah, that's what people believe. Oh, it was only, just a couple pounds and horses can carry anything. And yeah, horses could build those great buildings in the 1800s. Sure, whatever. But then we look at the HEMA, Historical European Martial Arts Association, And these are people who keep the historical European martial arts alive by apparently wearing black. I know they're just training. And look, I'm not denigrating their athletic efforts, they're pretty amazing. But some have tried to tell me, well, yes, this is an exact replication of what happened in the Middle Ages. Oh, really? This is happening now, today. And this armor that they're wearing was not produced from 14 to 1600 or whatever that year actually was. And yeah, you're not marching around in it. They appear to be inside. Now, I know they do outdoor events. And like I said, I'm not denigrating their athletic ability, but how is this comparable to what happened in the past? This is a sport. That was a kill skill. Now, yes, we can talk about chivalry and all the other rules of engagement and yada blah blah. But it's kind of fascinating to me that people try to use this as an example that, yeah, you see, look what they're doing in sporting events now with armor that was made today. It must have been just like it was back in 14 to 1600. Really? Come on. Julius, perhaps more for show. Yeah, no doubt. Victor Black, we wear the robot suit to hide inside of. I am Iron Man. Ah, wonderful words spoken. Heidi, I've been waiting for my knight in shining armor. I'm changing my mind. Space Fraggle. We all seen how RoboCop moved. Yep. Sky Sage. We love Excalibur. Yeah, great example of armor there. And that's what incited the exploration. Anyway, so what did the armor actually weigh? Well, who knows? That's what I'm really getting at. But what I find interesting is that when people started to question the accounts that armor weighed a couple 100 pounds, the mainstream scholars, academia walked it back. Oh no, it only weighed 30 to 55 pounds. And here are some example of some guys who are participating in a sport, guys or gals or whoever. And yeah, it's not as heavy. But then you also have this account of knights that had to be hoisted onto their horse because they were so heavy. But once again, don't worry, the mainstream had an answer for this too. They said this was just a myth, that this never actually happened. Although if you read many accounts of actual stories of knights that were contemporaneous, allegedly, who knows for sure, they said they had to do this. Oh, well, it's just a myth. And then movies were responsible from the 1980s. One particular movie showed it very directly, and that was Sword of the Valiant, where Miles O'Keefe, yes, that Miles O'Keefe from the Ator series, playing Sir Gawain, was lowered onto his horse by a hoist. But let's just say this was a myth, and how did this myth actually start? Of the knights weighing so much they had to be lowered on their horse. So again, if you do the research on this, you'll find this is something else they had to walk back. Oh, this didn't really happen. This was just myth. This was bad history. We'll tell you what good history is. This is bad history. Yeah. Ah, Jamie says it. Yes. An indication of powered armor. Ah. Yeah, Sean. Horses definitely had it bad. And that's just it, Sky Sage. And, I think if the armor was really constructed like that, and if the account of it being that heavy was true, then it's an indication of an additional technological or powered component, however you want to say it. So, Loveland, that's a good one. Yeah, what if you have to go? Well, I guess you're just like Peter Weller when he wore the RoboCop suit. He had to wait until they could get him out of it, until he could. Yeah. Vaughn, Robotech, that's a good one. But anyway, it's funny to me how people get really emotional about it, because you would think they were actually alive during that time frame and they actually wore the armor themselves. Well, nobody actually wore that armor. There's nobody alive. Even in the 1800s, if we were around in the 1800s, this would be just as much legend then as it is to us now. But it's a great example of the power of nostalgia for something you did not live and you did not experience. But don't worry, we've got Renaissance fairs, we've got reenactments, and if you're really into it, join the Historical European Martial Arts Association, and you can whack each other over the head with swords. Now, granted, remember, it's a sport. You're not really trying to hurt the other person. You're just trying to have some fun. But yeah. Anyways, I know that's a rather extreme example to go on, but Heidi, if we don't know, let's just make it up. Okay, I got one for you. The armor weighed 35 to 55 pounds. That's right. There you go. Anyways. Old World Delaware. Nice hearing some angst coming out of LA. I actually flashed a couple things tonight that showed that I'm real. And for some of these more esoteric explorations, that's where I prefer to do it. Because, those of you who show up to really search, I feel you deserve to see it. So anyway, I know that this is oh, good one, Heidi. Yeah, listen to me. I'm an intellectual. That's right. That's right. Thank you very much for my apple pie. Okay, I got to stop. Sky Sage. Help, I've fallen. I can't give up. Anyways, well, I hope you enjoyed this exploration. Thank you for joining me. And we've got some more coming out this coming week, and we're going to keep looking into these. So a little bit more of a, how shall we say, larger scale live stream coming next week. And for Prime Explorers, I've got your exploration coming out tomorrow, tentatively. So you'll enjoy it. For everybody, I hope you have a great week, and thank you for joining me. This is Lucius Aurelian signing off.